But yes, we are with your Citizens Action Coalition. We are a consumer and environmental advocacy group that works for fair utility rates and a cleaner environment here in Indiana. And we are going to fill you in on all the nitty-gritty details of NIPSCO's electric rate case. So we can move on to the next slide, please. And we do have quite a bit of ground to cover tonight. I'll get us kicked off with some quick introductions, and then we'll kick it to our Executive Director, Kerwin, to share some background information. Ben will walk us through the details of the rate increase, and then we'll wrap up with what you can do to make your voice heard, because you have an opportunity to let regulators know how you feel about NIPSCO's request. And the more folks that speak up, the better. Next slide, please. And the next one. Thank you so much. As we said, I'm Kelly. I'm the Director of Development at Citizens Action Coalition. I've been with the organization since 2013. I've knocked on doors, I've made phone calls, and these days I help get the word out about the work that we do and get folks engaged in our work for affordable utilities and a healthier environment. Of course, we've also got our Executive Director, Kerwin, our fearless leader. He wears a lot of hats for us at Citizens Action Coalition, but one of the hats that will be especially relevant soon is he helps to represent consumers of the Indiana State House. As you can imagine, utilities have a presence in setting policy at the Indiana General Assembly, so Kerwin makes sure that the people have a voice down there as well. And Kerwin's been with us for nearly 20 years next year, if I'm not mistaken. We also have Ben in speak tonight, our program director. Ben has been with us for a couple of years now, and we are so grateful to have him on board. Before Ben came to Citizens Action Coalition, he analyzed utility rate increases from around the country. So if you can imagine, when NIPSCO files to raise your electric bills, they file hundreds and hundreds of pages of testimony, spreadsheets that are huge and incredibly complex. And what Ben does and what our team does is sort through what NIPSCO is asking for to identify how it will impact all of you. So you'll be able to hear during his portion of the presentation exactly how NIPSCO's proposal would impact your pocketbooks. And then of course we've got Bryce Gustafson over here. Bryce is our organizer, so he travels all across the state, brings folks together. He is recording us this evening so that we can share this on our website to help inform people who weren't able to join us this evening. So thank you all so much. Good team. And one more slide here. Yep, a little bit about us, Citizens Action Coalition. As I mentioned before, we are the oldest and largest consumer and environmental advocacy group in Indiana. We were founded back in 1974. So this is our 50th year advocating for Hoosiers. There are really three main ways in which we work towards those cardinal goals of standing up for people and our environment. And one of those ways is the reason why we're here tonight. It's our regulatory advocacy. So NIPSCO has quite a few lawyers and a big legal team, and they engage in the regulatory process to defend what they feel they need. And so we've got a regulatory team, not only Ben, but we've also got an attorney on staff, and we do our darndest to go toe-to-toe with NIPSCO so that you have a voice in that regulatory process as well. As I mentioned quickly, we do a lot of legislative advocacy as well, because utilities do have a presence at the State House. So we like to make sure that politicians are hearing how proposed bills impact you all as well, the air we breathe and the water we drink. And last but not least, of course, organizing is another way that we help to work towards our organizational goals, because we are stronger when we all stand together. So with that, that's a little bit about CAC. I will kick it over to Kerwin for some important background info.
All right, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, again, my name is Kerwin, also Executive Director at Citizens Action Coalition. Yeah, next year will be number 20 for me. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Bryce, just because, as Kelly said, Bryce, our organizer, but I just thought folks would like to know, Bryce was in, correct me if I get this wrong, Kokomo on Friday, Michigan City on Saturday, West Terre Haute on Sunday, and Hebron on Monday. So Bryce gets around and puts a lot of miles on his car. You need to turn in those expense reports for those miles. I don't pay you enough not to expense those miles. But next slide, please. Yeah, just real quick, obviously low-income customers, well, all customers really are facing extraordinarily high energy burdens today. Affordability is becoming an incredible problem with respect to utility bills. 2022, largest increase in poverty on record in the United States. Beyond that, federal funding for what little support utility ratepayers do get, that's the LIHEAP Low-Income Assistance Program, is being reduced once again. And some stats up here clearly show the proportion of households unable to pay an energy bill is increasing all the time. Affordability, affordability, affordability. Folks are, at Citizens Action Coalition, we believe that all Hoosiers have the right to essential human services necessary for them to participate in society in a meaningful way. And folks should not be making difficult, hard, immoral choices of choosing to heat, choosing to eat, pick up their medicine, healthcare, rent, etc. Affordability is a real concern. Next slide, please. Yeah, and it is a top issue for Hoosiers across the state, whether it's the survey we found in Lake County where utility affordability was the #3 stressor recognized by folks. And you can also follow data at the 211 helpline, where right now utility bills are the #3 reason that people are calling 211 for help. Next slide, please. And quickly, Indiana, we lack any meaningful electric utility affordability programs or consumer protections or even a meaningful definition of what the word affordability means. We have no electric low-income rate for seniors, folks on fixed incomes, veterans, low-income households, nothing. We have no state policy whatsoever. We have incredibly minimal protections to protect consumers from disconnection or loss of service. We have an extraordinary amount of late fees, reconnect fees, convenient fees, deposit, on and on and on and on. And the Indiana General Assembly and the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission continue to do very, very little to protect consumers. Many what are called utility bill trackers, riders, adders to bills. Kelly mentioned the influence that the investor-owned electric and gas utilities have on the State House. That's probably an understatement. They own the State House would be more appropriate. They write the rules that govern those that regulate them. It's extraordinary the power that they have. They've been able to pass significant pieces of policy related to weakening the regulatory process. Keep in mind, we'll talk about the IORC in a little bit, but the IORC's role, the primary role of regulators, is to act as a surrogate to competition. These are monopolists. They have no competition in the marketplace. We have no choice. In exchange for that monopoly service territory and captive customers, they're supposed to be subjected to meaningful economic regulation to serve as that surrogate to competition. And when they go to the State House year after year after year after year and get favorable policies passed that reduce the discretion, the flexibility, and the authority of regulators, they're further eroding the only competitive element they have, and that's the regulators. But yet they use the legislative body to diminish and reduce the authority and flexibility of those that regulate them. Limited transparency, inconsistent reporting of data from utilities. What are we talking about? Numbers around how many have you disconnected, how many customers are late on your bills, those type of things. Affordability in the state of Indiana, when it comes to energy and utility service, is without question prioritized for industry, prioritized for economic development. It's a top-down approach. Affordability, I can tell you, affordability at the Indiana State House is discussed in the context of, are we an attractive, inviting environment? Are our energy prices attractive enough for business to relocate and move to Indiana? Of course we want economic development. Of course we want growth. But we also want to make sure that folks can afford their energy and utility bills. And lastly, we had some very effective energy efficiency programs known as Energizing Indiana, which were starting to succeed, passed under then Governor Mitch Daniels. It was Mitch Daniels' program. General Assembly repealed that program, got rid of it, prohibited that program in perpetuity in state statute. And then, of course, we had excellent solar net metering policies that were updated in 2011, again, under former Governor Mitch Daniels, that the next administration got rid of. Not only did they eliminate net metering, making it far more expensive, far more less economically attractive for homes, schools, businesses to put solar on your roofs, in your parking lots, on your farms, and get a fair return for that power. They got rid of that law. Not only did they end net metering in the state of Indiana is statutorily prohibited. Even if a utility wanted to offer a net metering program, the law prohibits them from doing so. That's how much power utility companies have. Next slide, please. And then just real quick about NIPSCO, I only got a little more, and then I'll turn it over to Ben to talk about the rate case. But yeah, first of all, this is about electric rates, not gas rates. I know a lot of folks have NIPSCO for both their electric and their gas utility. This is strictly an electric rate case. You can see their service territory across the state. The blue would represent gas-only customers, with the green being the electric. They are owned by NiPSCO. They're a publicly traded company, and they remain the only investor-owned electric utility in the state of Indiana that's headquartered in the state of Indiana. We have 5 investor-owned electric utilities in Indiana. Duke Energy used to be Public Service Indiana, located in Plainfield, Indiana. Now it's Duke Energy Corporation, located in Charlotte. Indiana Michigan Power, now owned by AEP, located in Columbus, Ohio. AES Indiana used to be Indianapolis Power and Light, are owned by AES, located in Alexandria, Virginia. And CenterPoint Energy, of course, in Evansville, used to be Southern Indiana Gas and Electric. Now they're owned by the CenterPoint Energy behemoth down in Houston, Texas. So NiPSCO remains the only investor-owned electric utility headquartered in the state of Indiana. And just, we like to put some flavor on the amount of money that we're talking about here. We're talking about $1.8 billion that NIPSCO collected in 2023. That's a lot of coin, that's a lot of cash. Next slide, please. And then real quick, just a little basics on the background before I turn over to Ben to talk about the case. In case you're unfamiliar, we have what's known as the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission in the state of Indiana. Five commissioners who regulate our investor-owned electric, gas, water, wastewater utilities. We are one of only 3 states in the entire country where those that regulate investor-owned utilities are either A, not directly elected by the public, 14 states elect those that regulate the utilities, and the other 37 states have confirmation hearings, public confirmation hearings, where commissioners receive an up or down vote by one or both chambers of the legislative body. That's not the case in Indiana. Our commissioners serve at the will and pleasure of the governor, all appointed by the governor. The only 2 rules we have about commissioners is that 1 of the 5 must be a lawyer, and no more than 3 can be from the same political party as the governor. And this was a field hearing scheduled by the IURC, where this is what's known as a base rate case or a rate case. Utilities are in all the time raising your rates. I talked about those trackers. There's tracker cases all the time, but this is what is known as a base rate case. This is the only opportunity the public has, stakeholders have, interested parties have, to sort of lift up the hood of the utility company and look inside. And look at their books and open their books. That's what a rate case is. They can't raise rates without approval from the IURC. I know people think they just raise their rates anyway. They cannot raise your rates without approval from the IURC. Rate case is similar to a trial, a proceeding. Ben will talk about the case, but the utility files the case. Intervening parties, the public, file their testimony either directly in the case or go to field hearings and file written comments or verbal comments. And then we have proceedings where a judge sits, witnesses in the case are cross-examined, etc. And the IURC can pretty much do whatever they want. They can approve it, they can reject it, or they can modify it. What we're presenting today is what NIPSCO has filed. Nothing else has been filed in the case from any intervening party or stakeholder, but this is just, if NIPSCO got everything they asked for, that's what understand that comments at the field hearing and comments filed in writing by the public are evidence the commission has to consider in the case. Those comments become part of the evidence of record. I won't go on about field hearings, because Kelly's going to talk more about that at the end. But that's just a little bit of background on the case, and with that, I will turn it over to Ben to talk about the nuts and bolts and what NIPSCO has for.
All right, let's talk about rate case basics here from NIPSCO. Let's have the next slide, please. One more. All right, so what is NIPSCO actually proposing in this rate case? On September 12th, NIPSCO came to the IURC with their formal proposal, and that is docketed there. They have 17 expert witnesses that filed written testimony in this case. So a lot of evidence filed on NIPSCO's behalf in this docket, explaining why NIPSCO thinks they deserve a large rate increase. This case is going to determine several things. You can break it down kind of into simply 3 buckets. First is how much money can NIPSCO collect overall with respect to how its rates are designed. That's called the revenue requirement. How much money do they get each year from captive ratepayers? Number 2, how are we going to spread those costs out across different types of customers? We have a lot of residential customers here tonight, but we also have schools, we also have industry, we also have commercial customers. How is a fair way to spread out those costs across different types of customer groups? That's another issue called cost allocation that's going to be decided in this case. Finally, we have to figure out, once we figure out how much money is fair to collect from ratepayers each year, how much is fair to collect from residential customers specifically, how do we then go about collecting that money from ratepayers in terms of how rates are designed? You can, for example, collect the same amount of money from every ratepayer through the same fixed charge. You could vary it by having variable charges based on how much energy you use. So that's the purpose of that. What's not part of this rate case, though, is also important. As Kerwin mentioned, this is not going to be touching the gas rates. So if you're a NIPSCO gas customer, this case in particular is not going to affect your gas bill. Number 2 is NIPSCO's overall resource portfolio. In other words, what resources are what resources are they going to go out and buy, purchase, build in order to provide you with reliable energy? That process is outside of this rate case. It's called the Integrated Resource Plan, and that is a public stakeholder process that you can participate in, but that's not the set of decisions that is going to be made in this specific rate case. Finally, I think it's important to note that we might have disagreements with what's in the law or what's in the regulation, but no matter what our opinions are about those rules, this case in particular is not going to be changing that. So we're trying to help provide you with information about what's in this rate case, and then what can we actually do within the confines of this rate case to make a difference. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some of these issues one by one. Revenue requirement. How much money does NIPSCO get to collect from ratepayers? What's a fair amount to provide service to customers in northern Indiana? Currently, as Kerwin mentioned, NIPSCO collects about $1.8 billion from ratepayers in northern Indiana every year. NIPSCO wants to increase that to nearly $2.2 billion per year. Overall, we're talking about a $369 million increase. That's an annual figure, so every year they're going to be collecting an extra $369 million if this is approved. That's an overall 20% increase, 20% more money they would be getting from Hoosiers every year. Now this rate increase would not happen all at once as proposed by NIPSCO. They're breaking it up into 2 rate increase steps. So part of the rate increase, if it's approved by the commission, would happen when the rate case is decided. So by September of 2025, that's when the first increase would take effect on bills. The full increase, which we're going to be talking about the overall impact of this case, and that's what we mean by the full increase, that's going to then hit by March of 2026. So let's look at what exactly NIPSCO is proposing. Currently, the average residential bill for a NIPSCO customer is shown on the left-hand side here. It's about $146 per month. That's for a customer that uses a little over 700 kilowatt hours per month. So your usage is likely going to be varying from that to some extent. You could use less, you could use more depending on your household. But 146 is about the average. In this case, NIPSCO is proposing quite a very large increase. They want to increase the average bill to $191 per month. This is a shocking increase, about $45 per month on average. This is not a typical increase. In fact, I've never seen an increase like this proposed by NIPSCO. And in fact, I've only seen one or two other utilities in the country propose something of this magnitude. So this is a very unusual and very large rate increase proposal. And if you're shocked by this kind of proposal, you should be. This is a very shocking proposal. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, I read something about this in the news. I saw NIPSCO say this is going to only be a $32 a month increase. Why are you saying $45? The reason is that NIPSCO is only including specific charges that it's increasing in this rate case, but there's other charges on your bill that NIPSCO is not addressing in this rate case that are also increasing at the same time. And NIPSCO has not included all those charges in its calculation. So we wanted to provide you with a fair estimate of what's happening today, well, what's happening when NIPSCO filed its rate case in September, and compare it to what's going to happen by March of 2026, including all of the charges, all the riders, all the taxes on your bill. What is that going to actually look like for you? And when you do that, it's a $45 per month rate increase. Next slide, please. And that's using NIPSCO's information presented to us in this case. It's not based on any complicated calculation that we came up with. Okay, so this slide is presenting a big picture of how NIPSCO's rates and how their bills for residential customers compare across the state of Indiana to other investor-owned utilities. Kerwin noted that we have 5 investor-owned utilities in Indiana, and you can see them on this chart here. NIPSCO's is in red. And this is comparing across 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. So that's a little bit higher than the average NIPSCO customer uses. So I did want to note that. But we use 1,000 kilowatt hours in this chart to kind of provide an apples-to-apples comparison across all utilities. It's a common baseline that we use in Indiana because 1,000 kilowatt hours is roughly on the order of what a typical Hoosier uses, even though NIPSCO customers use a little bit less. As you can see from this chart, the rate increase that's being proposed here is quite massive, even by comparison to some of our other Indian utilities that have very large bills themselves. In fact, you'll notice NIPSCO just very recently became the most expensive utility of all of our 5 investor-owned utilities in Indiana when it comes to residential bills. Just in 2024, you see that red line finally overtook that dashed gray line, which was CenterPoint. CenterPoint had the highest electric bills down in southwestern Indiana for, I think, roughly 15 years straight. NIPSCO 2024 overtook them with now the highest electric bills in the state. So this is a dire situation in northern Indiana. Next slide, please. Let's break down the specifics of the charges you'll see on your bills as proposed by NIPSCO. You have the current rates here, kind of in the center of this figure, that show you the current charges that you would see on your bill today. To the right of that, you see the proposed rates after the full rate increase would take effect by March of 2026. And then in the final column, you see what is that percentage change that they're proposing. The first charge shown on this is the customer charge. That's the charge you pay every single month, regardless of how much regardless of how much energy you use during the month. So right now that's a $14 per month charge. NIPSCO is proposing a very large 79% increase to $25 per month. That's, again, regardless of how much energy you use each month, you'd be paying that $25. That's not the only charge, of course. We also pay variable charges on our bill. The more energy you use, right, the more our bills go up. And that's because of that energy charge. Right now, energy is about 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what NIPSCO is charging. NIPSCO wants to raise that base energy rate up to nearly 20 cents per kilowatt hour. And then finally, the very last row, you see those trackers, those surcharges that NIPSCO has special permission from the General Assembly to tack on these charges for things that they might be spending money on in between rate cases and want to start collecting revenue from ratepayers quicker than they're able to file a rate case and get an order on. Those trackers make up a relatively small percentage of your bill, On the last slide, we saw that bar graph, and the trackers made up a relatively small sliver. But it is important to note that that small sliver, it's only about 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour today. NIPSCO is proposing a very large increase to that tracker outside of this rate increase through other means, and that's going to go over 1 cent per kilowatt hour. So a very large percentage increase, even though it's a relatively small portion of your overall bill. Next slide, please. So NIPSCO did propose what we think is a beneficial proposal with respect to multifamily housing residents. So if you live in an apartment building or a townhouse or another multifamily dwelling, NIPSCO did propose in this rate case a proposal that would say if you live in one of these multifamily units, you're going to pay a little bit less for your energy, because NIPSCO did a study and they found from that study that customers that live in multifamily housing actually use the grid less. They impose fewer costs on the grid, and therefore it makes sense to charge these customers a little bit less in return. We think this is a really solid proposal. We actually went to NIPSCO in the last rate case and said, why don't you consider this multifamily rate option? It could help customers living in multifamily housing pay a rate that's more fair than they pay today, because right now they're overpaying compared to what their actual costs of service are. So this, we think, is a positive step in the right direction, even though the rate increase magnitude, of course, is completely inappropriate and completely egregious. We do think this specific proposal to have a new rate for customers that are in multifamily housing is a good step in the right direction. Of course, you can see from this chart, these customers are still going to experience a rate increase, right? On the far left, the current charge is 16.6 cents for everybody today. So everybody's going to see a rate increase under NIPSCO's proposal. It's just folks in the multifamily housing situation are going to have a slightly smaller rate increase. Next slide, please. Since we are in school today and we're invited here to discuss this at a school here in northern Indiana, we did want to highlight also that this isn't just a rate increase that's going to impact households here. It's also going to impact other customers, businesses, schools, and so some of these rates can have a pretty significant impact as well. This is the rate for medium general service, which is a rate that's paid for by entities like this school right here, for example. And they're going to see a very large rate increase here on the order of 25%. So that's pretty concerning when we see schools with limited budgets that are having to make choices over do we pay for our increased electricity bill, or do we hire another teacher, or do we have another, more resources for our kids to help them learn better? So we do have concerns about this as well. We can see their charges are also going up quite significantly, with their fixed charges going up 30%, their energy charges going up 27%. So they do also want to highlight that this rate increase is not going to just affect households, but it's going to affect all of our community. Next slide, please. Why are rates increasing? This is a complicated question, and I think I would caution folks not to fall into a simple answer. It's not one thing that is driving the rate increase. It's a confluence, it's multiple factors coming together. One of the reasons the rates are going up under this proposal is NIPSCO wants a higher profit margin. So not just more profit, but a higher percentage return for every dollar they invest into new grid equipment, a new power plant. They want to earn a higher profit percentage on that investment. That's contributing quite significantly to this rate increase, and we think that's a particularly egregious proposal. When folks are struggling, when we see residential customers paying the highest bills in the entire state up here in northern Indiana, should NIPSCO really be rewarded with a higher profit margin? I think that's something that the commission should say no to. They should look really closely at that profit margin, make sure NIPSCO is not getting a higher profit than they deserve. There's a lot of other factors too. Another one is that industrial customers are not paying their fair share of costs. The very big customers that use massive amounts of energy got a sweetheart deal a few years ago that was approved by regulators that allowed them to shift a lot of the costs that NIPSCO spent money on to serve them. It allowed them to no longer have to pay for that set of costs, and instead stuck all that big bucket of costs onto every other type of customer. That led to a very large rate increase for residential customers over the past 4 years or so. Now there's a bunch of other things that are going on as well in our state. We have coal plants, for example. NIPSCO has some very old coal plants. Some of them are retiring or are planned to retire over the next few years. These things still have a lot of money that NIPSCO wants to make off of them in terms of they spent money on it and need to recover that money from ratepayers. They also have a lot of coal ash that they're cleaning up. When NIPSCO makes a coal ash mess and leaves it there for many years and it gets into our water and then they come back and they have to clean it up, believe it or not, they get a profit on that cleanup. We think that's ridiculous. We think that your rates should not be going up because NIPSCO made a mess, NIPSCO didn't clean it up, NIPSCO didn't dispose of that coal ash properly, and now it has to go back and do it right, and now it wants ratepayers to pay those costs, not just pay those costs, but also get a profit on top of those costs. There's also new investments that NIPSCO continues to make. For example, they're building up renewable energy, they have transmission and distribution system upgrades, these types of things that go along with being in the power industry. So those things cost money, those things are also a factor in our rates. And then very recently, NIPSCO got approval for a new natural gas power plant that will run very infrequently. And that's going to also be hitting bills in the near future as well for customers. So again, like I said, not one factor, but there's a multitude of factors here that are coming together that are leading to this large rate increase. Next slide, please. I mentioned the issue with the profit margin. NIPSCO wants to increase its return on equity, its profit margin in this case. Now, right now they have approval from regulators to have a 9.8% profit margin. They want to bump that up to 10.6. Now, 10.6 versus 9.8, that might sound like a very small difference, right? It's not even 1 percentage point. How can that really be that important? Well, when you take a small percent and you multiply by a very, very big number, you can still get a very big number. That's the case here. If NIPSCO were to keep that profit margin at 9.8%, instead of asking permission to increase it up to 10.6%, increase your rates accordingly, it could save us an extra nearly $52 million a year. In other words, this rate increase that they're proposing, instead of being this big, we could chop it down to this big, if we just control that profit margin and keep it at a reasonable level. In fact, we could go further than keeping it at its current level. We could say, NIPSCO, you've done a bad job with reliability, you've done a bad job with affordability, maybe we should think about reducing your profit margin a little bit to send a message to your management to do a better job of providing service to your customers. If we bumped it down to 9%, right, from 9.8 to 9.0%, it would cut this rate increase by over $100 million a year. So we're talking big money. That's real money that could make a really big impact on customers here. Next slide, please. All right, so we talked about a lot of the aspects of this proposal that are not good. I do want to highlight one good thing to NIPSCO's credit in this case is that they did come forth with a proposal to create a new low-income program, a program that would provide bill discounts to income-qualified customers to help the customers that are struggling the most with affordability, to help them be able to pay their bill. This program would provide a bill discount of between $15 and $26 per month for the 4 summer months when bills typically tend to be a bit higher during the year, like when we're using a lot of air conditioning or fans. That's really when power spikes in the summertime. So this proposal would help those customers pay their summer bills by providing this bill discount. It would also provide assistance with the security deposit and late payment fees for these customers. So we think this is a positive step in the right direction. This was something that we were in favor of in the last rate case, and NIPSCO withdrew that proposal. But we are happy to see that they did come forth proactively, in this case, and actually proposed it. So we're hoping that the Commission adopts this proposal because we think it would help a lot of customers. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, NIPSCO is proposing to use its new smart meters, also called Advanced Metering Infrastructure, or AMI, that they're rolling out right now and installing across northern Indiana at homes and businesses. They're hoping to use this new technology to be able to disconnect customers more quickly and more easily. That might sound counterintuitive to a lot of us. Isn't utilities business to keep people connected to the grid? I would think so. Unfortunately, when a customer can't pay their bill because they can't afford it, NIPSCO, as we mentioned earlier, NIPSCO can shut off your power, and that puts a lot of people in dire circumstances, right? If you don't have power to your home, you could be evicted, you could have a lot of other crises happen. You might not have a safe living environment if you can't have heating or cooling, you can't have refrigeration or cooking. So this is a really dire situation. We don't think NIPSCO should be using technology to make it easier to disconnect customers, to make it cheaper to disconnect customers, to ignore the plight of folks that cannot afford the utility bill. Right now, if NIPSCO wants to disconnect a customer, they have to actually physically go out to the site, knock on the door, leave a door hanger, go to the premise, and we think that's an important step to notifying the customer and to making sure that NIPSCO knows that this is a serious issue. They shouldn't be easily, at the press of a button, if you will, disconnecting their customers from service if they can't afford their bill. They also are proposing to phase out the reconnection charge. So that is an aspect of this proposal that I think I support, right? We don't want NIPSCO imposing a $90 charge on customers just to reconnect them after they've been disconnected, right? If NIPSCO has the technology to do so at the press of a button, it shouldn't be charging $90 to do so. So I think we can support getting rid of the punitive fees, but I don't think we need to accept the fact that customers need to be disconnected more easily in order to do so. Thank you. Next slide, please. I mentioned reliability earlier. Has anybody here experienced a significant NIPSCO outage in the last year? I'm seeing a lot of hands. Yeah, okay, I'm seeing a lot of hands. Yeah, NIPSCO unfortunately is not known for their good reliability, and that's what we're seeing in this figure right here. This is showing a metric called the System Average Interruption Duration Index, which is quite a mouthful, but what it's showing is how long is a typical power outage for a customer in NIPSCO's service territory when they have a power outage. And the red line is NIPSCO, and the gray lines are various other investor-owned utilities in Indiana. And so this is comparing the reliability over the last 3 years of NIPSCO to its peer utilities here in Indiana. This figure shows that longer power outages as you go up, shorter power outages as you go down. So obviously you want shorter power outages. You want to have your utility at the bottom of this graph, not at the top where NIPSCO is. We can see that NIPSCO has not been improving. In fact, they continue to be the worst in reliability when it comes to the duration, the length of the outages customers experience here. So this is really problematic that the reliability has not only been poor, but it's not been significantly improving as NIPSCO has been making investments over the past few years. Next slide, please. I'll be wrapping up my slides here shortly, so I just want to close that we are also looking at a lot of other areas in NIPSCO's rate case to see where there might be other issues. For example, we have the cost allocation issue. We want to make sure residential customers aren't getting hit with the brunt of this rate increase, aren't getting hit with an unfair large portion of the overall increase NIPSCO is requesting. We think NIPSCO should make sure they're collecting a fair amount from customers of all types. We also know that NIPSCO is pursuing a lot of data centers up here. These are going to use incredible vast amounts of energy, multiple times of what NIPSCO currently is selling to its customers. We want to make sure that these data centers aren't going to impose costs onto your bills. They should be paying their fair share. NIPSCO was silent about this in the rate case, and so we want to make sure that NIPSCO is not hiding anything. NIPSCO is appropriately considering that these customers are going to have a big impact once they come to northern Indiana. I mentioned the coal ash issue as well. We think that NIPSCO and its shareholders should be paying the cost of its coal ash that it stored improperly for years, that it knew was leaching toxic chemicals into waterways, and yet it still let sit there, still let polluting our water. So this should be a NIPSCO responsibility, a NIPSCO shareholder obligation to pay those costs. It should not be a factor raising your bills higher. As NIPSCO retires plants after they reach their useful life, as they get old and new technology is available, new generation resources are coming online, we We want to make sure NIPSCO is passing on all the benefits once it retires a plant. We want to make sure the benefit of that retirement is then reflected through lower rates that customers pay. It's another issue we'll look at. Now, when NIPSCO comes forth to the commission asking for a rate increase, it hires a lot of attorneys, a lot of expert witnesses from around the country, really smart people that have really expensive price tags for their time. Guess who's going to pay the cost of those lawyers and those experts? It's not NIPSCO shareholders. NIPSCO actually wants to take the costs, millions of dollars that it's spending to put together this case, to have 17 expert witnesses file testimony, to hire external counsel from fancy Indianapolis law firms to represent it, and then wants to take those costs and add it into your rates. We think this is an egregious example of how utilities slide in these little things that add to your rates that make them go higher and higher, and has insufficient oversight. Finally, the trade association membership dues. NIPSCO is a member of a lot of trade associations, things like the Indiana Energy Association. They lobby heavily on behalf of the interests of utility shareholders and to the utility executives, but they don't lobby on behalf of regular users, on behalf of policies that help us and help reduce our bills. We don't think those trade association membership dues that are to help NIPSCO shareholders should be paid for in your rates, and yet NIPSCO is proposing to have you pay for these trade association dues. So these are just a few examples of the other types of issues that we and other interveners in this case are going to be kind of diving into the details, we're going to be filing testimony on in December, and are going to be opposing so we can have more affordable rates in northern Indiana. Next slide, please. Great. With that, I am going to turn it back over to Kelly to tell you all how we can take action, we can stand up to NIPSCO, and let the commission hear from us.
Well, I think we've got some motivation to take action. Do y'all want to pay for fancy pants lawyers? I don't think so. So we will talk to how you can make your voice heard in this rate increase. And if we could go to the next slide, please, that would be great. So we've been talking a bit about next week, a week from tomorrow, is the public field hearing in Valparaiso. And it is on Tuesday, November 26th, 2 days before Thanksgiving, when I'm sure a lot of folks will be cooking or traveling. But it's really important that we have a strong turnout at the public field hearing because the appointed regulators, Kerwin mentioned to start, the folks who will be having a final say in this field hearing, they will be at that field hearing to listen to folks about their concerns with this rate hike. And as Kerwin also mentioned early on in our presentation, rate increases are lengthy legal battles. They take nearly a year to resolve, and they're similar to a trial in civil court. So as Ben mentioned, we'll be filing testimony in December. So will other groups that intervened, like those big industrial customers that got nice deals out of the last rate increase, and other big heavy hitters that hire lawyers. So after the testimony is filed, we will be expecting a final order in the case in July. Okay? And the next slide, please. So, the field hearing coming up next week is really, really important. It'll be at Ivy Tech Community College in Valparaiso, and the more folks that show up, the better. But if it is a bad time for you, it is really important that you make your voice heard in writing. You can submit written comments to the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor, which is a state agency that intervenes in cases like this. But as we mentioned, Kerwin mentioned at the beginning, when you submit written comments or you speak out at the public field hearing, that is considered evidence in this case, and regulators are required to consider that, which is why it's really helpful when we have a lot of folks make their voice heard. We do understand that life is busy, especially if you've got kids. There's always so much to do all the time. So we really work hard to be a resource and to make it as easy as possible to engage and to make your voice heard. So if you hop onto our website, we've got a lot of information about this rate increase. We also have a one-click action that has sort of a pre-form letter that you can use to submit your comments on the rate increase, but you're welcome to edit. and write how you will be impacted by such a large increase proposed by NIPSCO. And all of this is part of, the one click on our webpage. If you want to make an impact in this case, it also helps immensely to spread the word in your community. So social media is a big help. Forwarding information via email or text is great. Flag people down at the grocery store. The more ways that you can get out information about the increase and how folks can take action, the better. Because again, life is busy, there's a lot going on, there's a lot to keep track of. Our NIPSCO bills hit every single month, but folks might not know that this case is going on right now. Next slide, please. Okay, so public field hearings. We have had a lot of the big utilities in Indiana file pretty hefty rate increases in the last year or more. I'm gonna highlight the center picture here, which is Evansville. CenterPoint filed a $42 a month rate increase, and they had a pretty phenomenal turnout at the public field hearing. They had 2 meetings scheduled. One started at 2 in the afternoon. The other was supposed to start at 6. There were so many folks there at 2 that it bled into the 6 o'clock hearing, and they had to move the 6 o'clock hearing to a bigger room. And I think it lasted until 10 or nearly 11 at night.
Almost 11.
Almost 11. So we have, amazing turnout. Again, my heart breaks because folks were really worried about how they're going to afford such a big increase. But it was a really spectacular display of the community coming together and saying, we can't afford this. The first person that testified in Evansville was the mayor of Evansville, and she was followed up by county councilors and city councilors. I'm not sure if they had any state legislators there, but Bloomington had their state legislators show up for Duke's request to hike bills by about 45 a month, or are they 42? I forget. We've had 3 big rate increases this year, all over $40 a month, which makes me sick. But as heavy as it is, when we're not sure where that increase is going to come from in our monthly budget, the positive ray of hope in some of these hearings are people coming together as a community and saying, not on our watch. So, something to look forward to. Next slide, please. So, when you're thinking about what to say at the field hearings, and I will say, if public speaking is your cup of tea, this is your moment to shine. But if you are not a big fan of public speaking, that's okay, because showing up, even if you don't plan to speak, still shows regulators that you care. And again, they need to see that folks care about this. But some advice, if you would like to testify, when you're thinking about what to say, share your story. How will this rate increase impact your family, people in your community, senior citizens that you care about? Again, the regulators or commissioners, the 5 appointed folks, they are hearing a lot from NIPSCO throughout this whole rate increase process. They're also hearing a lot from lawyers for the big industrial customers. So this is your chance, and really the only chance, for the public to be very clear about how this rate increase will impact you. We do also on our website have a template that you can use to help craft your comments if you're interested, and that seems helpful. Because you can read written comments aloud. If you write them down first, that can help make sure that you don't forget anything, like I did at the beginning of this town hall tonight. But it can be intimidating, especially if it's a big turnout. So writing down what you want to say beforehand can help you stay concise and stick to your key points. There can be a lot of emotion associated with such a large rate increase, and I do understand that, but it is important to keep in mind that we don't want regulators to get defensive. We don't want them to get uncomfortable. We want them to understand where we're coming from. And that's some advice for if you would like to testify at the field hearing. You can and you will be sworn in, so I think sometimes that might catch people off guard. But when you testify, oftentimes you're facing the utility regulators directly. So just keep in mind that's who you'll be looking at. And if you need a friendly face, look for our lawyer, Jen, because she'll be smiling at you, and she's a friendly face to keep in mind. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we will dive into the question and answer session, which is one of the things I forgot to mention at the beginning, I think. But as we wrap up, please know, again, you can go to our website, sidac.org, or you can scan that QR code or a QR code on one of the flyers out front to submit that one-click action. And again, you can edit it to share your thoughts for that field hearing. On our website, we also have a whole lot of other resources for the specific rate increase. I will make a little plug for those of you that signed up for email action alerts or would like to on their way out. Right now, it's the NIPSCO rate hike, but come January, the legislature will be in session, and there will likely be laws introduced that will impact your utility bills. So we would love to keep you in the loop, because again, right now you can make your voice heard on this NIPSCO rate increase. A couple months down the road, you will need to make your voice heard on legislation as well. Okay, so who's got a question? If you'd like to raise your hand, I'll come to you.
I don't need.
Oh, sorry.
You mentioned that there is a template we can reference for given spoken comments. Do you have like a direct link to that page somewhere?
It's on the sidac.org /NIPSCO rate hike 2024 on the right hand side.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yep. I think that might help with the recording.
First, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here tonight. Secondly, these hearings, a lot of people are familiar with them. Are you limited to how much time you have to speak? I mean, we're not going to go on
They
for
will.
hours and hours, but
Well, they'll tell you at the beginning, there'll be a little thing, hey, this is a field hearing, they set the norms, and they'll tell you, limit your comments to 3 to 5 minutes. Been doing this almost 20 years, I have yet to see the commission stop somebody, but I think they're gonna, they prefer you stay in the 3 to 5 minute range, and most people do, but they won't limit you down.
okay, well, I'm wondering what we're wanting on, but I'm very much thinking about doing this, okay, so I have to collect my thoughts, but you've given so much information, and I'm really, in a way, disappointed there's not more township people here tonight. I really am. But I, again, just want to say thank you for bringing this to our attention. We all saw it in the Times paper. We all know what's coming. And that's about where it goes, and it stops there. So I'm going to stop and give someone else a chance, but because I have so many questions, and I didn't have anything to write down, questions and thoughts. But,
Note for next time, Kelly, hands.
but I just want to say thank you, because this is an unbelievable education. I do want to offer one thing. Do we have any friends down in the State House that'll help us with legislation?
We do have some friends.
Some.
But what we need are you people to help move everybody else.
One last question, comment is this. America just suffered through the last 4 years of despair. We now have a new president elected. One of the things he said he was going to do was help drive down and cut our energy costs, our utility costs in half in a year. I'm going to hold him to that. I'm going to hope that he can do what he can do to help America. So in regards to that, we'll have to wait and see. His hand hasn't even come off the Bible yet. But I believe he's going to help America. What's this going to do if this passes or they get some kind of rate increase in the future, in a year or so in the future? Can the federal government step in to help with utility, with what we're talking about here tonight?
Well, I would say, first of all, the federal government has extremely limited jurisdiction when it comes to retail utility service. the regulation of retail rates, whether that's water, wastewater, electric, gas, is a function of the state. That is not a function of the federal government. That's why all 50 states have their own regulatory structures, their own regulatory commissions, and so the feds play a marginal role in the context of regulating your electric bill, your gas bill, your water bill. Are there things that the feds could possibly do? We'll see. Being a nonpartisan organization, I'm not going to comment necessarily on, I would definitely hold them to that.
We'll pray about it.
Yes. And the other thing I'll say real quick is, there will be a second field hearing in this case. That field hearing will be in Lake County, probably in the Gary, East Chicago, Hammond area, but there will be a second field hearing in this case. For some strange reason, has not been scheduled yet, but there will be a second field hearing.
I was just going to say, per the questions, our website has our organizational's email on it, staff@sitact.org, and our main office line, 317-205-3535. So if as you digest this, because I know it's a lot, and you come up with questions, email us or give us a phone call or find us on social media and message us that way, and we will do our darndest to respond as soon as we can. Who else has a question?
Right here.
Okay, Joe.
I could probably project.
I'm not sure if our camera guys are going to be happy with me.
Just trying to understand the political landscape. So you've got the commission. How many people sit on it?
Fight for everything.
5. What stake do they have in regards if rates go up versus rates stay the same or slightly go up? What's in it for them either way? Because I'm certain they live somewhere that they themselves may be impacted by this. So trying to understand the political landscape there.
Will you wait for the microphone, Callie?
Bryce, is it okay? Can you hear us without?
Mike's better.
Okay.
Well, the correct answer is that there's nothing in it for them. I mean, they are, by definition, supposed to be independent regulators that are making objective decisions that are allegedly in the best interest of the utilities, while also in the best interest of the public. So there's really nothing in it personally for regulators other than they are a political body. And part of the challenge when you have political appointees who serve at the will and the pleasure of the governor is, from our perspective, the IURC for a very long time has been, number one, there to serve the financial interests of the investor-owned utilities, protect their value, protect their share, but also, because of their relationship with the governor's office, they are frequently there to implement the policy, the energy policy of the governor of the state of Indiana, which is not their job. Their job is supposed to be, as we discussed earlier, that surrogate the competition, the presence of competition in the absence thereof. And so that's another problem with political appointees in those types of positions is they become sort of tools that are sometimes face enormous political pressure to make certain decisions based on pressure from the governor's office around a case. So I don't know if that answers your question. There's nothing really necessarily in it for them. There's a lot on the line right now. Whenever you change regimes, I hate to use the word regime, we have a new governor. Will the governor keep these current appointees? We have a couple up. The chairman's up in March. So there's those types of considerations as far as decisions go. But there's nothing necessarily for it in them with respect to these decisions other than trying to stay in the good graces of their boss and also potentially stay in the good graces of the industry for maybe which some of them hope to work for someday. A little revolving door, if you know what I mean. So.
This is what you can tell them. This is why we need term limits in America. that's a broad statement, but to weed out these types of things in our legislatures for fairness around America. People can disagree with my statement, but it's true. They go in with dark hair and they come out with gray hair. They've been there, alliances are met. As you just pointed out, the legislature, correct me, or state it again, they do not want to work with, there's more legislation against what we're trying to achieve.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay. I rest my case. They need to go, because they're working for the people, and people need to remember that. Everyone that takes a check that we elect, they work for us. America has forgotten that.
Yeah, no, we have on our website, we have voting records along with campaign contributions for the State House going back to 2006, correct? Yeah, so you can see the extraordinary amount of money that the electric and the gas utilities and the energy industry in general contribute. I think there have been years where $1 in $4 contributed at the Indiana State House came from the energy and the utility sector. 1 in 4.
And to his point, if I can just continue, yes, they do, I think most of them live in Indianapolis or nearby, but it made me think they do have.
Chairman lives by me in Brownsburg.
Okay, we've got a Brownsburg, but near Indy, and it just made me think of Evansville and folks saying they don't really know us, right? Because it's 3 hours south, or up here, a couple hours north of Indy, and we have no mechanism to hold these folks accountable. So just some thoughts that came to mind from what you were sharing. I think I saw another question.
The elected officials that are on this board, and the 5 of them, how long have they been in office?
Good question.
Well, they are appointed. They are not elected.
Sorry, appointed.
Well, it's on the website. Each commissioner has a bio. Chairman Houston, I think he's been there probably, this is his 10th or 12th year. His 2 terms as chairman. Commissioner Freeman has been reappointed. So at least probably 8 years for Commissioner Freeman at least. Commissioner David Ziegner is now I believe the longest serving commissioner in the country. Guess what governor appointed Commissioner Ziegner? Just think of past Indiana governors. What? Evan Bayh appointed David Ziegner. And then we have 2 fairly new commissioners. Commissioner Bennett came on in the last 12 months, and the other commissioner. Yeah, Valletta is about 2 years. So it ranges from a year to almost 40.
So if I understand this correctly, effectively over the next 2 calendar years, NIPSCO is looking for a 20% plus rate increase. 3 out of 5 of these appointees have been on the board or in charge of overseeing this for greater than 4 years. On NIPSCO's website, you can actually print off a summary of each of your monthly payments. Average temp, number of days, units used, yearly usage, whether it's gone up or down, and the bill amount and the cost per day. If you map this out from November of 2019 to November of 2024, in the last 4 calendar years, 48 months, our average utility prices for electricity has seen a 43.89% increase. If 2 out of 5 of the people on this board have been on longer than that 4-year period, what can we actually do to change this? Because the 20% increase that they are proposing now is actually less than we've been seeing.
Everyone here was looking at me for the tough questions.
Well, we can do a lot. This is not a done deal. This is this beginning of this case, and I know it's really hard to hear optimism when you've been stuck with 5+ years of rate increase after rate increase after rate increase, and it feels like nobody's listening and nobody cares, right? That's a terrible feeling. I think we have a tough road ahead of us because, yes, these same regulators, a lot of them have approved rate increases in the past. But this is not a typical rate increase, is it? I mean, $45 a month is extraordinary. And I think right now what we're seeing in the state is a much higher emphasis on utility affordability than we have in the past. I think regulators, lawmakers, elected leaders, they're hearing from their constituents. They're hearing from people about their bills. They know that this is now rising to a top issue for a lot of households. So I think there's a growing recognition from our leaders that something's got to give, something's got to change, because this is not sustainable for household budgets. This is not going to work to have rate increase after rate increase after rate increase. And it can be really discouraging to have a lot of passion, to go into hearing, to speak your piece, and then to have regulators maybe not give the order or decision you want. We totally feel that. We've been fighting this stuff for decades. It's going to be really disheartening when you don't get that good outcome. But we're not giving up. We're not going anywhere. We're going to fight this case. We're going to fight it hard because we know what y'all are experiencing. We see this across the state. We see that this is not fair. We see that NIPSCO needs to do better. So I hear you that this is really frustrating. But what NIPSCO wants, what the utilities want, they want to come to that hearing. They want to see nobody in the audience. They want y'all to give up, to stay home, to not tell your neighbors, to not speak out about it, to not go to your elected leaders and say, what the heck's going on with NIPSCO? Come to this hearing, speak on our behalf, speak for the people that elected you to office. That's what scares NIPSCO. When they go into that hearing, they see a full house, they see elected leaders getting up and speaking and saying, my constituents said, this is going to be the what? Third, the fourth, fifth rate increase in how many years? Do not approve this. So, like I said, it's really discouraging when you see these rate increases happen and you feel like nobody's listening. But don't give up because we are making progress. We are getting this issue elevated. We need people behind us. We need masses to show up. We need to organize because that is how we're going to defeat NIPSCO. That's how we're going to stop this rate increase. It's not going to be from just 4 people at Citizens Action Coalition saying, don't do this, it's not fair. It's going to be when hundreds of people turn out, when lots of people are emailing, when lots of people are submitting comments, when lawmakers, when regulators all of a sudden start fearing for the jobs because people are organizing and speaking out. And when they start fearing that, hey, there actually could be some political consequences if we don't listen to people, if we don't stop these never-ending rate increases, that's when we can make some progress. So hang in there, keep fighting. We're going to fight right there with you.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that there's many rate increases like this in the past that presumably Citizens Action has organized around fighting. What has generally been your success rate in either denying the rate increase or like lessening it or however you want to define that? What has been your success in the past with that, and what sort of downfalls have there been that you think could give insight to what to do this time, and on and on?
That's a great question. Herman, let me pitch it to you.
I had a feeling you were. Well, I would say it varies case to case. Frequently, there are settlements. We recently entered into a settlement in the AES case in Indianapolis, in the I&M case, where we were able to get significant concessions in the settlement, reducing rate increases well below $10 a month, getting concessions on some of the things that Ben talked about with respect to trade association fees, lawyer fees, expert fees, those sort of things. So there's always the opportunity for a settlement. Generally, I've never been involved in a rate case where at least some discussions haven't occurred. certainly all rate cases have been settled, so. But you gotta keep in mind that we are, in rate cases, we are an intervener amongst many intervening parties. You have the Office of Utility Consumer Counsel, the public advocate, who represents all ratepayers generally. CAC is a regular intervening, representing primarily residential customers. Then you have the big guys. You have the large industrial users, BP, Gary Works, Cleveland Cliffs, Praxair, GM. They lawyer up, they protect their interests, and then talked about shifting costs from the big boys to the little guys. That's what those folks do, but then you have the large commercial customers that come in, the Walmarts, the Krogers, the big commercial customers. Frequently we'll see cities, towns intervene, representing their interests in there. So there's a lot of intervening parties, a lot of stakeholders that come into play. Settlement, I would say, is always the preferred outcome, but settlement presents an opportunity to have some negotiations and some compromise. And what we're seeing in the last year, we've seen 3 rate increases. There's 3 active cases right now with rate increases above $40 per month. This NIPSCO case, a recently concluded, Centerpoint, where there's been no order issue, and then, the current Centerpoint case and the current Duke case. Those cases did not settle. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say, it's hard to find middle ground when a utility company wants $45 a month. Even if you cut that in half, that's $23 a month. That would be something that's a tough pill to swallow. So these large cases aren't settling, and the commission has yet to order. So we don't know where these things are going to go.
So, what part of it goes to repairs and renovations? So, is that like before they insert profit and stuff? That's almost like R&D kind of for a company. Like, certain percentage has to go back into improving their products.
Keep in mind, I'm the lobbyist for the policy guy, so if the expert wants to correct me, please correct me. But the bottom line is, from my perspective and from what I've seen over the years, is utility profit goes straight up to the holding company and directly to shareholders in terms of dividends. And what I've learned in my 20 years is utility companies, every single penny that they spend, they will try to get back from you, including money for their lawyers and their experts. And so the reality is that profit goes upstream to shareholders in the forms of dividends or stock bonuses for executives. Very little is reinvested back in the community. They do have their foundations where they love to send out their press releases and their little stories about sponsoring this parade, sponsoring this little league, $100,000 to a local art gallery, whatever the case may be. But you're talking billions. Yeah. You're talking billions. And so to me, the answer to your question is none of them. Because every single penny that utility companies spend, they make every effort to collect it from you guys. And to make matters worse, when the IURC, the regulators say no, what's their behavior? Well, they go across the street down to the Henry State House and say, Mommy said no. Can you please change the law so that they have to say yes? And then they go back across the street after they get that law and they say, here, that money you didn't let us have now, over there, they say you have to let us have. So the reality is, it all goes to profit. It's all shareholders. It all goes upstream. And every single penny that they spend, they make every effort to make sure that they can collect it from you.
Such wonderful questions. Anybody else have a question before we wrap up?
Have there been any comparisons with the cost of living or standard raises in an area, for example, Northwest Indiana, over the course of time compared to the increases that they want?
That is an excellent question. That's exactly the type of evidence that we try to collect, analyze, and then present it to the commission to be like, hold on a second. Folks are only making 20% more than they were 10 years ago, or whatever it may be, whereas rates are 40% more than they were. This is not keeping track, right? That's the type of evidence we're trying to share with the commission to try and convince them that this rate increase increase is not fair, it's not reasonable, it's way outside the bounds of what typical folks are making in terms of their increase in wages over time. So yes, that is exactly the type of evidence that we try to put front and center of the commission, so they can see that, so they can be aware of that, so they can know this is out of whack. This rate increase is not something most families are going to be able to afford in our service territory.
We'll say, unless we've got any other questions, but one of the folks who testified at field hearing in Terre Haute was a teacher. She talked about getting a raise. And if Duke's $42 a month rate increase went through, her raise was going to be gone. So studies are crucial, but also saying those lived experiences are also exactly what needs to be shared at the field hearing.
Yeah, right.
That's perfect for the field hearing. Yeah.
I'll never forget, sorry Kelly, I'll never get a field hearing in South Bend, maybe 5 years ago, where a senior citizen living on Social Security went to the microphone with her actual monthly expenses, down to the fact of, I have this much at the grocery store, I buy a loaf of bread, 8 ounces of cheese, so on and so forth. I forget the number, I have $12 left. I&M wants 19. I don't have it. Testimony like that is incredibly compelling and moving, and impacts people's ability to, hopefully make the right decision. And getting back to the question about what can we do, that Ben answered well, the other thing I would say is, do not forget the complicity of the State House. Do not forget your state senators and your state representatives' roles in setting these policies and creating the framework by which utility regulators regulate. Because the IURC will frequently go out of their way to say we are a creature of statute, emboldened by the authority granted us by the General Assembly. That's your state senator, that's your state representative. Look up your state senator and your state representative on our website, see how they voted on these issues over the years, and make sure you stay in touch with them during a legislative session and remind them who they're down there representing.
Well said, and again, if you sign up for emails, we'll let you know when to get a hold of them and exactly which bills you need to be concerned about. So any last questions? I think we're right at 8. Okay. Well, we want to give a really heartfelt thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for asking such great questions.
Superintendent again, thanks for having
Yes,
me.
thank you, Superintendent Brooks, and if you can bring everyone you know next Tuesday in Valparaiso, we'd love to see you there again too. But thank you all so much.
Kelly left pens.
I will bring a million pens.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.